Here, let me. Hello? All right. I muted these two, so we're all good. Welcome to the Majors and Quinn Facebook page and YouTube channel. My name is Annie. I'm the events coordinator at Majors and Quinn Booksellers in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am joined today by Mary and Christine, two other booksellers, two of my partners in crime at Majors and Quinn. We're back with some spring recommendations for you. We just wanted to hop on our Facebook Live and tell you a little bit about some of the great spring titles that we've been reading and that we want to tell you all about. So we're just gonna, go through a couple books each, have a little conversation, and if you're watching, let us know where you're watching from. Hi, Mom. And ask us questions if you've got them. We'll be here for a little while talking books. So, Mary, how about you tell us something you've been reading recently?
My very current spring selection right now is The Seedkeeper by Diane Wilson. Just finished it. She is a Minnesota-based author. She's Dakota, and she's written a couple books about Dakota culture and tradition for Minnesota Historical Press, but this is her first novel, and it is a thing of beauty. It's really good. It's about, as you might surmise from the title, it's about nature and our, human relationship to nature, and how we take our place in the ecosystem that we're all a part of, and within the context of Native American traditions. And it's about a woman named Rosalie Ironwing, who is trying to keep holding it up. Here we go. She's a Dakota woman born in the 60s, raised in southern Minnesota on a small farm. The setting is like kind of near Mankato. But the farm she lives on is kind of remote. She's raised by her father, and he has decided to keep them kind of isolated from the rest of the Dakota community. But he nonetheless wants her to grow up knowing some of their cultural traditions, especially with regards to nature and how we sustain ourselves from the land around us. So she learns how to identify the plants in the area around them, to know their medicinal and culinary benefits, how to hunt the animals that live around there, and importantly, how to perform the rituals of gratitude to show respect to the lives of the animals and plants that are we're taking from to sustain us. So she does grow up with those that very much immersed in that tradition. But her father dies when she's still a girl, and she gets taken by the authorities and put into the foster system, and winds up growing up with this white family who offer a very lonely and unloving and an abusive environment. So as soon as she comes of age, she decides to escape, and she winds up marrying a farmer who's this white guy who, young white man who from, kind of the same area she's from, who has this farm, and his family have all died. So he's left to maintain this farm by himself. And he's kind of a lonely soul, and recognizes her as also a lonely soul who needs a place to live, and just kind of takes her in exchange for her company. So she becomes a farmer's wife at the beginning of the 80s, when the agricultural world is starting to transition to agribusiness, and she's going to witness the advent of GMO seeds and their widespread adoption by the farmers that she lives among. And all of which is kind of would be sort of a travesty to the cultural traditions that she grew up with. And she's still pretty isolated from the Dakota community, so she's growing up among this, or she's living among this white community that holds her in pretty low regard. And what sustains her through all of this is her garden. And she starts keeping a vegetable garden where she's able to apply the principles that her father taught her. And she's able to save seeds every year. The whole thing started with she found this cache of seeds that her husband's mother had been saving, according to the ages old tradition of or method of growing plants, vegetables, grasses, fruits that produce seeds, and saving them, harvesting the seeds, and drying them, and storing them in dark and cool conditions. And then when the planting season rolls around again, you can plant them. Um, and this really stands in contrast to the sort of opposing methodology of GMO seeds, where you have to buy them anew every year, and you can't save them, and so the farmers are enter into this like sort of devil's contract where they have to buy new seeds every year, and the seeds are genetically engineered to kill off everything that isn't the plant that that seed is growing, and all that sort of thing. And there's a lot of harmful impact on the land. And anyway, so she learns, and we as the reader learn along with her about the importance of the seed and saving the seed, and its sort of metaphor for sustaining life. And it eventually, this practice leads her back to her culture and her community, and she comes to understand the importance of saving the seeds, and how that can mean the difference between life and death. And we hear from some other voices, people that are in her life. A friend of hers who is also a Dakota woman, who's like kind of her one connection to the community, who becomes a lawyer and a climate activist. And we also hear from an ancestor of hers who survived the Dakota American War, and was shunted off to a reservation, and how they were able to, through saving seeds, they were able to survive and grow food for themselves on the reservation, and all that sort of thing. So it's very much about cycles, and generations, generational trauma, generational knowledge. Um, and it's just a really, really beautiful book, and a great read for spring, especially for those of us who like to garden, as we're starting to get into the soil again, and think about what the land means, and just exactly who it belongs to. Um,
That sounds awesome.
and yeah, and I'll mention too, by the way, like many, it's from Milkweed, local, wonderful local press here in Minneapolis. And like many Milkweed editions, it is a paperback original. So if you don't like to buy hardcovers, then no worries. It's just in paperback, and it's a really beautiful, really beautiful, book object, with this beadwork by an artist named Holly Young. Fun fact, who is from Standing Rock, and she's a really cool artist who I went and looked up on Instagram. So I recommend checking out her work. So,
Is that book out now? I see. I dropped
it
a link
is.
for it, and it says March 9th, but I also wasn't sure if that was true, because it also it looks like it might be unavailable from the warehouse at the moment. But I read it.
It is out now, and I think we actually got a copy or two in at work, and at the bookstore, and sold out, of course. And we're trying to our ordering inventory guru Tom is trying to get us some more in. But
Great.
yeah, did go on back order, but we should be able to get it again soon for anyone who might be interested in ordering it.
Yeah, and we have a comment here from Judy who says a nice parallel read would be perennial favorite Braiding Sweetgrass. Well, that's very astute, because it is from the same publisher as Braiding Sweetgrass, Milkweed. Very good at the environmental stuff, very good at publishing native voices. So good call.
Yeah, and it's blurbed on the cover by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and it actually has some. The author provides some resources in the back and recommends Braiding Sweetgrass and recommends some sources for indigenous seeds and things like that. So yeah, it's really cool.
All right, Christine, what about you?
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm unmuted. There we go. Yeah, my first one is local author. It's Brood. And I think this came out earlier in March, right? So this is a local author. This is Jackie Polson. And this is her first novel too, so that's exciting. I also love the cover art with these like beautiful feathers. This is the ARC, but the hardcover has it too. Yeah, so it's a local author. I believe she lives in St. Paul. And the basic premise of this book is it's about chickens, which is what drew me to it initially, because I have a flock of backyard chickens myself. I have 6 of them. And so when our publisher rep, just was describing it and said it's about chickens, that was my go-to. I like reading stuff about birds. Yeah, but this one is, on the surface it's about chickens, but it's also this like really interesting meditation, kind of in the vein of like H is for hawk, where the author takes birds, chickens in this case, and uses them as a sort of lens for loss and grieving. So in this case, she's grieving a miscarriage, the narrator of the book. And we learn that kind of slowly, and it's not sort of as overt, and like it's not brought up all the time, but it's always there in the background as she's caring for these chickens. And then there's the drama of the chickens too, which is that this takes place in Minnesota. And so these chickens have to survive Minnesota winters, which get very cold. And the winter in the book, it gets like, -40 or something, -60, as it does in Minnesota. And so she's trying to keep these chickens alive, trying to put a little heater in there, but she's worried about the heater setting the coop on fire because there's lots of dust and hay and all kinds of stuff. And then there's predators to worry about that are going to, potentially attack and eat the chickens. A tornado comes through. There's just like random happenstance things that affect her flock. Like it's just kind of all of the little dramas of this chicken flock, plus her grieving. And then also there's these 2 other great characters of her husband, who's this like intellectual professory type who's just kind of always in the background trying to offer her wisdom and guidance, but also like comically failing sometimes, but in a lovable way. And then her best friend too is involved, who is a real estate agent, is really quirky, and also like very fertile. Like she just keeps having kids. Meanwhile, the narrator can't. Or has a miscarriage. So there's these interesting dynamics, but ultimately about chickens, and that's kind of why I liked it. But yeah, I would say it's a quieter novel. It's like H is for Hawk if you're a fan of that. And then also I think it's good for readers of Marilyn Robinson, so like her Gilead series, anything like that. Just really, really beautiful language, but like a quieter story.
Awesome. That sounds really, really good. And it's great that she is local. So if you are interested in local authors, check that out. I will talk about a book that is not local. This is Permafrost by Eva Baltazar, translated by Julia Sanchez. And so it is actually translated from Catalan. So Eva Baltazar is based in Spain, but writes in the Catalan language, which is another language spoken in Spain. And this is obviously kind of a short novel. I would also call it a quiet one. You know, it's very much a sit down and kind of just sink into it, read it for the afternoon, and you know, before you know it, it's over. It's also just one of those that you read for the very interesting narrative voice. So it's first person. It's this young woman who has spent a lot of her life sort of distancing herself from her family, traveling all around. She's very, you know, she's very smart. She's very depressed. She is very mean. She's very funny. And her family is just like too normal for her. So she has all these great like disses against them, like as she sort of tells, it's very vignette based. So it's kind of, you learn about her sister, you learn about her mother. You also learn about her sexual and romantic history. She's lesbian. So she has, basically it's a lot of exploring relationships with women, both romantic and familial. And it does build to a rather surprising twist ending, actually. So you think you're reading a book where nothing's really happening, or it's just kind of this meditative, here are scenes from my life. But there is a chronological order somewhat, and there is a surprising thing, a rather shocking thing that happens, and it's very moving and it's very beautiful. And if you're at all interested in literature in translation, this book, which is also a paperback original, it looks a little different than this. It's like just the blue cover, and it comes out next week, April 6th. But it's like almost worth buying this book just for, there's a translator's note by Julia Sanchez at the end, and it is fascinating, and it is so illuminating of like how her process of translating and how the process of translating both translates literature and creates new literature, and it's super fascinating. So Permafrost, Eva Baltazar, go sit outside, read this in an afternoon. It is delightful.
Gotta love a mean lady protagonist.
She's so funny and mean. Speaking of sitting outside, we have neglected to talk about the happy hour portion of this roundtable. So I'll just give a quick shout out to the beer that I am drinking. It is La Reina IPA from La Doña Cerveceria, which is in Minneapolis. Hello to you. It's very good. Yeah, so just wanted to give them a shout out. And why don't you guys tell us what you're drinking?
Well, okay, I've got the Super Giant from Able Seed House and Brewery up in Northeast, and it's super good. It's a golden ale, and this was not at all planned, but it turns out it's kind of an appropriate choice given my my book that I was talking about, because their whole practice is that they source their grains locally from small Minnesota farmers, and they also, I guess, make their own malt, which I gather is unusual. And malt is made from seeds, so that's why they're Seed House. And those are also, of course, sourced from Minnesota farmers. So rad brewery, and really good beer, super good, spring, summer, light, awesome.
Yeah, so I went to Duluth this past weekend and went to URSA Brewery, which is an awesome brewery. We just tried it for the first time. So we got some little growlers. Yeah, I've got it poured in a glass and everything. But this is their double IPA. It's good. Very happy.
I just went there for the first time a couple weeks ago. It was delightful.
It is. Their space is cool too. Their little outdoor area and
cool. I also like how we all pick beers that have really good like packaging design. So shout out to the art directors or whoever is doing the can designs for these because they're super cool. Well done, folks.
All right. Well, let's keep it going. Also, another comment from Judy. She wants to remind everyone of Vesper flights because Christine also mentioned H is for Hawk. I think we've talked about this before. My mom, she's given a shout out to the Libro FM audio version. So that's just a reminder. You can always listen to these books on Libro FM. I'm just going to really quickly, not to bore all of my colleagues to tears forever about this book. So I'm not going to not going to talk too much about it. Just to say that this is technically a spring book. It came out in March. We just had an event with this author via Tan Nguyen. It will go public on our YouTube channel very soon. It was a registration event, so at the moment it is not visible there, but it will be soon. He was in conversation with Bao Phi, one of the wonderful Twin Cities-based writers, who also works at the Loft Literary Center. And this is the follow-up to the book The Sympathizer. If you recall that from 4 or 5 years ago, won the Pulitzer Prize. This is a continuation of that story, although it can be read completely on its own. It is thrilling, and it is a crime novel as well as a philosophical novel. It's just like one of the best out there, so read this book. Yeah, that's all. That's all I got to say.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, I haven't read that one yet, but Sympathizer is it's all it's cracked up to be. So yeah, just go for it. Yeah. Well, I'll do one because I also have a chicken related book. So I guess y'all didn't know it was going to be a live stream about chickens today. Let's see if we can. I don't have the actual book because I listened to it on audiobook on our favorite platform, Libro.fm. And I actually read it last year, but I believe it came out in March of 2020, and it's from Grey Wolf Press, which is another great local independent press here in Minneapolis. And so it came out like right as the pandemic was starting, which, is a bummer. But I wound up listening to it that spring when we were all shut down and isolated, and it was a really it was kind of a good thing to listen to during that time. But it's kind of a strange little book, and it's about a chicken heist. That's basically, it's a chicken heist book. It's about this ragtag group of animal rights activists in Iowa who decide to liberate a million chickens from an industrial chicken barn at this it's this farm that raises chickens for the layer hen industry. So I mean, it's hard to even describe this book, but it's about this character, this young woman who moves to the Midwest to live with her dad, and like she experienced this tragedy in her life and winds up living with her dad, who's this really boring guy, and just like in the middle of nowhere in Iowa, and it's just like sort of a sad landscape, and it's filled with just industrial agriculture and people who work for industrial agriculture. But she meets this woman who's an inspector or an auditor for these like chicken raising concerns. She's like a state auditor for the agriculture, and somehow they recognize each other as kindred spirits, and they decide that they need to save some of the chickens, because the chickens are not living good lives. They're in these barns, and really, like, using the term farm and barn in this context is like kind of a euphemism, because these really, these facilities and these industrial, like, agriculture concerns, like, don't really resemble anything like what we normally think of as barns and farms. So they decide to liberate these chickens, and they're going to steal them in the middle of the night. So a big part of the book is all about them figuring out the logistics of this operation, and they hook up with this local community of activists who work undercover on these chicken farms so that they can gather information and images to share with the larger world to hopefully enact change. And it's really just fascinating. Like, there's this whole community of these activists who do this job for years, and they stay undercover, and they like smuggle out photographs and stuff like that. And they have all these little interpersonal dramas between them, and some of them have quit and left and are getting drawn back in now, and they're getting sucked back into this crazy chicken rescue operation. And so it just kind of like tells the story of this heist, and it's interesting because the book has one of those like super omniscient narrators. Like, it's sort of a twist on the omniscient narrator, where the narrator just like really knows everything and like can see hundreds of thousands of years into the future, and can like knows everything that's going to happen to all the characters in their lives, even though those parts of their lives don't come into the book. And also knows like what goes on in the minds of the chickens. And there's like actually a chicken who's one of the characters in the book that we meet, and her name is like Bagak or something. And like, so we learn, a little bit about chicken culture and the chicken beliefs in the afterlife, and like what they think happens to them. And we find out, it's like she eventually like escapes and goes off on a little journey of her own. And so it's just this like funny little book about, this chicken heist that happens in this like crappy part of Iowa. But every now and then throughout the book, the narrator will just kind of zoom out and give you some larger context about what's happening to the earth and where we're all going, and what where the chickens believe we're all going, and all that sort of thing. So it's a really great book. I think the audiobook was good. And it's from Grey Wolf Press, and you should be able to get it at Majors and Quinn.
Yeah, just put a link in there in the comments. So it looks like we do have copies on our shelves right now if you want to do the pickup option, or we can ship it to you. Christine, what's your next one?
Yeah. My next one is up and coming, so it's not out yet. This is let's see, I think it comes out in May. They just bumped up the pub date. I think it was going to come out in June, but now I think the latest is May 25th. So this is Revival Season by Monica West. And this is a novel about this young girl named Miriam. And she's part of this religious family. She's the daughter of a preacher, a Baptist preacher in the South. They're in Texas. And every year they do revivals. They travel around the South doing these healing ceremonies in small towns across, sort of all across the Bible Belt, basically. And so she's the daughter of this famous preacher. He's known for doing these sort of miraculous healings where someone who can't walk is touched by him and then is able to walk, or a blind man can see, or someone who has diabetes is healed, etc. And so when we first start the story, Miriam, the daughter, is very much a cheerleader for her father. She believes in him wholeheartedly. She believes in her faith. She has a strong connection with her family. It's her mother and then her two siblings. She has a brother, Caleb, and a sister, Hannah. And Hannah actually is disabled. So interesting dynamic to the story as well, because her dad's a healer. And so, yeah, so we start out with them in the revival season. So they're setting out to begin the summer of traveling around. But then something happens. Her father turns out to be a little rougher with when he handles some of these healings than she'd ever known him to be before. He ends up, kind of beating up this guy because the guy isn't fully healed during the revival, and there's sort of this whole scene that Miriam witnesses, and that sets us off on the rest of the story. And so once she sees this about her father and that he can be violent, her faith starts to come to crumble. She starts to question things. She questions things about her father. She questions things about her faith, about her family, about healing. And then to get even more complicated, she might be able to heal. So she one of her friends has diabetes, and her friend has an episode where she passes out. And this young girl, Miriam, lays her hands on her and says, "Please wake up." And the girl wakes up. And so it's like, did she heal her? And so, yeah, it gets really interesting. Maybe sort of beyond just exploring like faith and belief and all of that. It gets into family dynamics. It gets into the South and the culture of the South and the Baptist church, and just really interesting, I think, in terms of like layers of this girl coming of age, but also coming of age in the church, coming of age in this particular church, in this particular family. Yeah, I think it's a really great, like, character-driven story, but it's very suspenseful, and I think the plot really moves well too. So I've been just kind of like flying through it. And yeah, I'm, as someone who grew up in the South and also grew up in a religious family, it's like a really interesting, gets into the like weeds of all that and the complicated mess of belief, and that, people are human and we make mistakes, and how do you hold that against someone who you've always looked up to, and he's the preacher of this church, and he's fallible, and what do you do with that? Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Again, it comes out in May, so a little bit later this spring, but yeah, look out for it.
We have a comment here from Luis. Is it History of Wolves, but in the South? I have not read History of Wolves. I think he is referring to that book by Emily Friedland. Have any of you read that one?
I have not.
Well, Luis, I don't know, but I know that book was very popular at Majors and Quinn. And I also know that she has a book of short stories called Catapult that is really good. But yeah, so sorry, that wasn't very helpful. So, oh my God, my mom. Actually, my mom asked a question a little while ago. Do we have recommendations for books with a Duluth theme or base, since so many of us had mentioned having gone there? I'm trying to think. I'm sure there is something that I'm forgetting.
I don't think I've read anything that's actually based in Duluth. I mean, I've read stuff that's based up north.
Yeah.
And I know there's a book about that it's I can't think of the name of it, but it's the title of it is the like Dakota name for Duluth. And it's like we